Augustinus Vox presents On Order, Book 1, written by St. Augustine, published in the Patrologia Latina by Jacques-Paul Migne, translated and edited through prompting by Kyle Paulson, narrated by the digital voice of Kyle Paulson. Zenobius. It is very hard and very rare for any human being either to see or to explain the order of things, first, the proper order of each thing, and then the order of the whole universe by which this world is held together and governed. On top of that, even if someone can grasp such matters, he is not always able to find a listener who is worthy of such divine and obscure questions, either because the person's life is not worthy, or because they have not formed their mind through study. And yet there is nothing that the best minds desire more eagerly, nothing people are more eager to hear and learn, especially those who try as far as they can to keep their heads lifted above the rocks and storms of this life, than this: how is it that God really does care about human affairs, and yet such great perversity is spread everywhere in human life, so great that you would not assign it even to some cheap household manager if that person were given such vast power, much less to God? Because of this, people who worry about such things think they are forced to accept one of two claims: either divine providence does not extend all the way down to these lowest and most earthly matters, or else all evils are actually done by the will of God. Both opinions are impious, but the second is even worse. For although it is extremely ignorant and dangerous for the soul to think that anything at all is deserted by God, still, among human beings no one ever accuses another person of being unable to do something. People accuse others of negligence instead, and blame for negligence feels much cleaner than blame for cruelty or malice. So our reason, trying to stay mindful of reverence toward God, feels pushed into a tight corner. It thinks it must say either that earthly affairs cannot be governed from above, or that it is better that such things should be neglected or ignored, rather than governed in a way that would justify every complaint against God as gentle and blameless. But who is so blind in mind that he hesitates to attribute anything in the movements of bodies, anything that is beyond human planning and human will, to divine power and its wise oversight? Unless perhaps someone wants to say that the limbs of even the tiniest animals are shaped by sheer accident with such exact and subtle symmetry, or that things which are not done by chance cannot be admitted to be done by reason, or again, that throughout nature all the things we admire as being well arranged by themselves, without any human skill at work, should be separated from the deepest counsel and decision of divine majesty and given over to some empty, foolish opinion. But this is exactly what makes the question so heavy. We see that even the legs of a flea are laid out in a wonderful and orderly way, and yet human life is tossed and churned by countless disturbances and instabilities. However, imagine this. Suppose someone's eyesight were so narrow that, looking at a mosaic floor made from tiny stones, his eye could not take in anything wider than a single little tile. He would criticize the artist as if the artist had no sense of order and composition, because the poor onlooker would think the colors and shapes were confused and chaotic. Why? Because his vision could not rise high enough to see and take in all at once those designs which make one single beautiful image. That is exactly what happens to untrained people. They cannot embrace and consider with their weak minds the arrangement and harmony of the universe. So if anything happens that offends them because it is too big for their way of thinking, they imagine that some great ugliness has crept into reality itself. The main cause of this error is that the human being is unknown to himself, and yet if a person is to know himself, he needs a long habit of turning away from the senses and gathering his mind into himself and keeping it there. Only those people achieve this who, by solitude, burn out the scars that everyday life brands into their minds, or else who heal those wounds through the liberal arts, the disciplines of learning. When the mind is thus given back to itself, it understands the beauty of the universe, beauty which rightly takes its name from the One. Because of this, a soul that keeps running after many things cannot see that beauty. It runs after poverty, without knowing that this poverty can be escaped only by separating itself from the many. By multitude I do not mean many people, but all those things that the senses touch. And do not be surprised that the soul suffers greater lack the more it tries to grasp many things. Think of a circle. However large it may be, there is only one middle point to which all the radii converge. The geometers call this the center. Now, even though you can slice the circumference into an innumerable number of parts, still there is nothing else in the circle that everything can be measured from except that one point, which somehow rules all the rest with a sort of law of equality. But if you move away in any direction from that one point, you lose everything in proportion to how far you go, and how many directions you scatter into. So also, when the soul spreads itself out from itself, it is beaten and torn apart in a kind of immensity, and it is crushed by a real and miserable poverty. For its very nature forces it everywhere to search for the one, but the many will not allow it to find him. Still, what I have said here, and the cause of the soul's error, and the way everything is brought back together into the one and made perfect, and yet the way in which sins must still be avoided, you will certainly understand, my Zenobius. I know your mind and your love for every kind of beauty, joined with a soul that is free from unrestrained and filthy desires. This is a sign in you of coming wisdom, stamped on your heart by a divine decree, warning destructive passions not to take over your cause and drag you into false pleasures. For nothing more shameful or dangerous can be found than to betray your own cause in this way. You will grasp these things, believe me, once you devote yourself to learning. Learning purifies and cultivates the mind. Without it, the mind is in no condition to receive the divine seeds. And as for this whole process, what it is like, what order it requires, what reason promises to those who are good and eager to learn, what kind of life my dearest companions and I are living, and what fruit we gather from our free time, these books, I think, will explain all this to you well enough. They will be sweeter to us because they bear your name, more than because of our own labor, especially if you yourself are willing to insert yourself into the very order we are talking about by choosing what is better and letting yourself be fitted into it. When pain in my stomach forced me to leave the school, a school I was already trying to escape anyway, as you know, in order to flee into philosophy, I went at once to the country house of my close friend Verecundus. Shall I say he was pleased at this? You know very well how kind he is to everyone, and especially to us. There we began talking with each other about whatever seemed useful, and we made sure a scribe was always present so that everything could be written down. I saw that this helped my health. Because some care had to be given to speaking clearly, there was no room for brutal, heated argument in our discussions. Also, if we decided to write anything down for posterity, there would be neither the pressure of having to perform in the moment nor the hard work of trying to remember what we had said. With me there were Alypius, and my brother Navigius, and Licentius, who had suddenly developed a deep passion for poetry. Trigetius had recently left military service and come back to us, and had fallen in love with history like an old veteran. By this time we already had some written works. One night, as usual, I woke up and silently began turning over in my mind whatever came into it from I know not where. My love for discovering truth had now grown into a settled habit, so that, if such questions were on my mind, I would stay awake for roughly the first half of the night, or at least the last half, thinking about something or other. I never allowed myself to drag the young men out of their own night's rest, because they did so much already in the daytime that it seemed too much if they also spent part of the night on study. I had moreover given them the rule that they should spend some time with themselves apart from books, and learn how to live at home with their own minds. So, as I said, I was awake, when suddenly the sound of water behind the bathhouse flowing past struck my ears and drew my attention more sharply than usual. It seemed strange to me that the same water should now roar more loudly and now more softly as it crashed upon the stones. I began asking myself what the cause could be. I confess nothing came to mind, until Licentius, by banging the board of his bed and scaring away some noisy mice, made it clear that he too was awake. He was lying in a bed near mine. So I said, "Licentius, I see from the light of your dear muse, your little lamp, that you are up reading. Have you noticed how irregularly that water channel makes its noise? This is something new to me." "No, that is not new to me," he said. Once, when I woke up and was longing for clear skies and listening to see whether the rain was coming or not, This same water was doing exactly what it is doing now. Tragedius agreed. He too was awake in the same room, lying on his own bed without our knowing it. The room was very dark, which is almost unavoidable in Italy, even for the wealthy. So when I realized that our little academy, whatever it was at the time, Alypius and Navigius had gone down to the city, was awake even at that hour, and that the running water was nudging me to say something about itself, I asked, "What do you think is the reason that the sound alternates like this? We are not going to suppose that at this hour someone keeps passing by and interrupting the flow to do some washing, are we?" "What else could it be?" he said, "except that some leaves, of the sort that fall so thickly in the never-ending autumn, have fallen into the narrow channel and sometimes block the flow, and then give way, and when the water that was pushing against them has passed through, the leaves gather together once more and jam the path again. Or else something like that happens because of the random motion of the leaves floating on the current, something that can sometimes hold the flow back and sometimes let it through again." This seemed plausible to me, since I had nothing better to offer. I admitted I had been thinking about the problem for some time without finding a solution, and I praised his insight. After a short silence, I said, "No wonder you were not surprised by this. You were quietly absorbed within yourself with Calliope. No wonder." "True," he answered, "but now you have given me something much greater to marvel at." "What is that?" I asked. "It is that you were surprised," he said. "Where does our sense of wonder usually come from?" I replied, "and what gives birth to this weakness of mind we call wonder, except when something unusual appears that does not show its cause clearly?" He answered, "I can accept what you say about its being beyond what is clear to us, but that it is beyond the order of things that I do not accept. To me, nothing seems to happen apart from order." At this, I was more than usually excited and hopeful. Here was a young mind, one that had only yesterday begun to turn toward such things, suddenly reaching for something so great. We had never before discussed anything like this together, so I said, "Good, very good. You have felt deeply, and you have dared greatly. Believe me, by a long stretch you climb past Helicon and try to reach the very peak as if it were heaven itself. But I wish you were fully present to this opinion of yours, for I am going to try to shake it." "Let me alone for a little while," he said. "Please, I have fixed my mind very intently on something else." I became a little afraid that he might be completely swallowed up by his passion for poetry and be carried far away from philosophy. So I said, "Then I must urge you to chase those verses of yours with every kind of meter, and hunt them down with howling and chanting, for they are trying to build a huge wall between you and the truth, a wall bigger than the one between Pyramus and his lover, and that wall still had a crack where a breath of air could pass through." He was planning to write about Pyramus at that time. I said this more sternly than he expected, so he fell silent for a while. I dropped the matter and returned to my own thoughts. I did not want to drag a mind that was already preoccupied into an argument and burden it for nothing. After a time he said, "I can say about myself what the mouse in Terence says. I really have betrayed myself. But perhaps that last line in the play will turn out in the opposite way for me. He says, 'Today I am lost.' I, however, may find myself today. For if you do not think it foolish to believe that the superstitious make omens even from mice, then if I woke that mouse and made him go back to his hole and rest by my noise, why should not I myself be called back by your voice to go home to philosophy rather than lose myself in song? For that is what our true unshaken homeland is, as I have begun to believe you when you tell me every day. So, if it is not a burden to you, and if you think it should be done, ask what you wish. I will defend, as far as I can, the order of things, and claim that nothing at all can happen apart from that order. I have drunk in this idea and absorbed it so deeply that even if someone beats me in this debate, I will attribute that not to any rashness, but to the order of things. It will not be reality itself that is beaten, but only licentious." I was delighted and returned myself entirely to them. Then I asked Trigetius, "What do you think of all this?" "I am strongly in favor of order," he said, "but I am uncertain, and I very much want this great issue to be examined carefully." "Then let your favor," I answered, "be on that side. As for your uncertainty, I think you share that with both Licentius and me." "No," said Licentius, "I am certain of this opinion. Why should I hesitate to tear down that wall you mentioned, before it fully rises up? Poetry alone cannot pull me away from philosophy as much as a lack of trust in the search for truth could. Trigatius was delighted. Then we have something even greater, he said. We have Licentius no longer an academic. For Licentius used to defend the academics zealously. Leave all that, please, said Licentius, so that this little tricky, captivating thing, he meant the academic doubt, does not pull me away from that divine reality which has just begun to show itself to me and on which I hang in hope. I was overflowing with joy, more than I had ever dared to hope. I blurted out the line of the poet about Apollo and quickly turned it toward the true high truth, saying that all wise men are its prophets. So let us begin, Licentius, I said. Trusting in reverence, let us worship him and crush beneath our steps the destructive fire of smoky passions. Ask your questions, he said. Please, if only I could explain this tiny something inside me using both your words and mine. Then answer me this first, I said. From what do you judge that this water flows in an ordered way and not at random? You might answer that the fact that it runs along wooden channels, carried to the places where we use it, belongs to order. Humans used reason to arrange it so that the same stream would serve both for drinking and washing, and given the possibilities of the location, it was fitting to do so. But what about the leaves? You say they fell just in such a way that this strange noise we noticed was produced. By what order of things, rather than by sheer accident, are we to think that this happened? As if, he answered, anyone who looks calmly and clearly could imagine that the leaves could have fallen in some other way than the way they did. Once a person firmly grasps that nothing can happen without a cause, he cannot think differently. Do you want me to keep going and explain the positions of the trees and branches, the exact weight that nature gave to the leaves, the mobility of the air in which they float, the softness of that air through which they fall, their varied paths as they drop depending on the state of the weather, their weight, their shapes, and countless other causes that are even more obscure? Why should I chase all that? These things are hidden from our senses, deeply hidden. But it does not somehow escape my mind that nothing happens without a cause. A tiresome cross-examiner might go on to ask, why are trees planted there at all? I would answer, because humans followed the richness of the soil. If they are not fruit trees but grew there by chance, I would still answer that we see too little. The nature that produced them is not random. What more is needed? Either someone must teach me that something can happen without a cause, or else you must all believe that nothing happens except in a fixed order of causes. I am happy to be your tiresome cross-examiner, I said. After all, I pulled you away from talking with Pyramus and Thisbe, so I will still ask you questions. For example, this nature which you want to appear ordered, why did it produce these very trees that bear no fruit, to say nothing now of all the countless other things? While he was thinking what to answer, Trigatius said, Is the usefulness of trees given to humans only in their fruit? How many other uses there are, in their shade, their wood, their very leaves themselves? Please, said Licentius, do not try to answer his questions like this. There are countless things that could be brought up that bring no benefit at all to humans, or whose benefit is so hidden and so slight that it cannot be dug out or defended by us, especially by the likes of us. Let him rather teach us how anything at all could happen without a cause. We will consider that later, I replied. For now I do not have to be the teacher, since you, who have just confessed that you are certain about such a great thing, have not yet taught me anything, though I am eager to learn and stay awake day and night for this very purpose. Where are you sending me? He said. Are you going to say that I follow you more lightly than those leaves follow the winds that carry them into the running water? It is as if their falling is not enough. They must also be dragged away. For what else will you be doing when Licentius teaches Augustine and tries to stand in the middle of philosophy? Please, I said, do not throw yourself down so low, and do not lift me up so high. In philosophy I am still a boy, and when I ask questions, I care very little through whom he answers, that one who listens to my complaints every day. I believe that someday you yourself will be his prophet, and perhaps that someday is not far off. Still, others who have stayed far away from these studies have been able to teach something once they were drawn tight by the chains of questions in the company of people talking together. And even something is not nothing. Don't you see, since I gladly use your own example, don't you see that these same leaves, blown by the winds and floating on the waves, resist the plunging current a little, and perhaps remind some people about how there must be an order of things if what you are defending is true? Then he leaped out of bed for joy. Who could deny, great God, he cried, that you govern all things by order, how tightly everything fits together, how each part presses forward to its own knot in the chain, how many things have already happened so that we might have this conversation, how many more are happening so that we might find you? For where else does the fact itself, this conversation, come from, except that it flows out of and is led along by the order of things? Think about it. This is why we were awake, why you noticed that sound, why you asked yourself the cause, why you did not find the cause of such a tiny thing, though you searched for a long time. Even the mouse came out so that I, being awake, would be revealed to you. And finally, even your own words, whether you planned them or not, since no one can control what comes into his mind, have circled around in such a way that you yourself are teaching me what answer I should give you. For tell me, please, if these things we are saying are written down, as you have arranged, and spread a little further among people, won't the whole story seem so important that someone might well ask some famous prophet or Chaldean astrologer about it long beforehand? And if such a man had foretold it all, people would say he was divine and praise him to the sky, so that no one would dare ask him why some leaf fell from a tree, or whether some wandering mouse bothered a man lying in bed. Has any of those so-called diviners ever predicted little things like this, either on his own or because someone forced him to answer? And yet, if he foresaw that some book would be written that would not be insignificant, and if he truly foresaw that it must happen this way, for otherwise he could not divine it, then everything, every fluttering leaf in the field, every movement of the tiniest animal in the house, would be just as necessary in the order of things as that written work. Without these seemingly worthless events beforehand, the words that are being written now could not have come to mind, nor could they pass through our lips and be handed on to future generations. So now please let no one ask me why each thing happens. It is enough to see that nothing happens, nothing is born, without some cause that generated and moved it. It is clear, my young friend, I said, that you do not know how many things and what great men have spoken against divination. But answer me this. Is this order you have taken up as your cause something good or something bad, in your opinion? He muttered, You have not asked your question in a way that lets me simply choose one of the two. I see a kind of middle here, for order itself does not seem to me to be good, nor does it seem to be evil. At least tell me this, I said. What do you think is contrary to order? Nothing, he replied. How can anything be contrary to something that has taken over the whole and occupies all? For anything that is contrary to order would have to exist outside order. But I see that there is nothing outside of order, so I think we must say that nothing at all is contrary to order. Then error is not contrary to order? Asked Trigetius. Not at all, he said, for I don't see anyone make a mistake without a cause. Now a chain of causes is included within order, and error is not only born from a cause, but also produces something for which it itself is a cause. Since it is not outside order, it cannot be contrary to order. When Trigetius fell silent, I could hardly contain my joy. I saw the son of my dearest friend beginning to become my son too, not only my son, but a friend as well. This was someone whose eagerness for even basic studies I had almost given up on, and here he was as if he had suddenly looked back at his own estate and then rushed with full force right into the middle of philosophy. While I was silently marveling and boiling over with gratitude, he suddenly cried out as if seized by some vision, Oh, if only I could say what I want to say. Where are you, words? Come help me. Both good things and bad things are within order. Believe me, if you will, I have no idea how to explain this. I marvel at it myself. I was silent and amazed. When Trigetius saw that our friend was a little calmer after this sort of sobered intoxication and more able to talk, He said, "What you said, Licentius, seems absurd to me and far from the truth, but please be patient with me a little and don't disturb me by shouting. For, as you said, both evils and goods are within order, and that order comes from the highest God and is loved by him. From this it follows that evils come from the highest God and that God loves evil. Can anything more irreverent be said about God?" I was afraid for Licentius at this point, but he groaned, not because he did not know what to answer, but because he did not know how to bring what had to be said into words. "God does not love evils," he said at last, "and for this very reason, because it is not the order of things that God should love evil, and he loves order so much exactly because through order he does not love evil. But how could evils fail to be within order if God does not love them? This is precisely the place of evils in order, that they are not loved by God. Is it a little thing to you that the universal order is such that God loves good and does not love evil? So evils are not outside order, even though God does not love them, and yet he loves the order. For what he loves is precisely this, that he loves the good and does not love evil. This is a great part of the order and of divine arrangement. This order and arrangement keeps the harmony of the universe by distinction, so that even evils must exist. Thus, as with opposites in rhetoric, which we enjoy hearing because they are set against each other, so in reality the beauty of the whole is shaped out of opposites." Then he paused a little. Suddenly he got up and moved closer to Trigetius's bed. "Let me ask you something," he said. "Do you agree that God is just?" Trigetius did not answer. Later he said he was astonished and terrified by this new inspiration, and by the sudden outburst of his old classmate. When Trigetius kept silent, Licentius pressed on. "If you answer that God is not just, then do what you like. You were accusing me of impiety a moment ago. But if, as we are taught, and as we ourselves must feel under the pressure of order, God is just, then clearly he gives each one what is his own. That is what justice is. But what distribution can there be without distinction? And how can there be any distinction if everything is good? And what could be outside order if God's justice gives to good and evil alike what they deserve? We all admit that God is just, therefore everything is contained in order." Having said this, he jumped from his bed, and with a calmer voice now, since no one was saying anything to him, asked, "Have you nothing to say to me, Augustine? You who forced me into this? Will you not answer?" "A new religious feeling has come over you," I said, "but I will answer more fully in daylight, which seems to be returning. Or perhaps the light shining through the windows is moonlight. In any case, we must take care that this great insight of yours, Licentius, is not swallowed by forgetfulness. When could my poor writings not demand that all this be committed to them? I will tell you honestly what I think. I will argue against you as much as I can, for if you defeat me, no greater triumph could be given to me than that. But if your still weak powers, still underfed by the disciplines of learning, cannot yet support such a mighty God and yield to some human cleverness or some sharp but mistaken argument on their side, for I shall try to play that part, then the matter itself will remind you what strength you must build up in order to return to him more firmly. And I also want this conversation of ours to turn out more polished, for I do not want it to be for untrained ears. For our friend Zenobius often spoke to me about the order of things, and when he asked deep questions I was never able to satisfy him, either because of the difficulty of the material or because of lack of time. He became so impatient with my many postponements that he even challenged me in verse to answer him more carefully and fully, and good verse too, which only makes you love him more. I could not read his poem to you then because you were far from these matters, nor can I now because his departure was sudden and confused by public troubles, so that nothing like this came to mind. He had decided to leave it with me as a written challenge. There are many reasons why this conversation should be sent to him. First, because I owe him an answer. Then because it is fitting to show, in this way, what kind of life we are leading to someone who cares so much about us. Finally, because no one rejoices more in the hope I have for you than he does. Even when he was here with us, because of his friendship with your father, really, with all of us, he was very anxious, that the sparks of talent he noticed in you might not be fanned into flame by my effort, but might rather be snuffed out by your negligence. And when he hears that you also love poetry, he will rejoice in a new way. I can already see him in my mind, full of joy." Licentius caught this with delight. "Nothing would please me more," he said, "but whether you mock my changeable childish nature, or whether this is truly happening in us by some divine hint and order, I do not hesitate to tell you openly. I have suddenly become slower and colder toward those verses. Something quite different, some other light, is now shining in me. Philosophy is more beautiful, I admit, than Thisbe, or Pyramus, or Venus and Cupid, and all that kind of love." With a sigh he gave thanks to Christ. "I received all this, what shall I say, with great joy. Others may interpret it as they wish. I do not care, except that perhaps I was rejoicing too much." Meanwhile day broke. They rose, and I in tears prayed much to God. Then I heard Licentius cheerfully and playfully sing that verse from the Psalms: "God of hosts, turn us again, show us your face, and we shall be saved." The day before, after dinner, when he went outside to relieve nature, he had sung the same line a bit louder than my mother could bear. She was very devout, as you know, and could not stand that such holy words were sung over and over in such a place. He kept repeating only that line, because he had recently learned the tune, and, as often happens, he loved the new melody. She scolded him because she said the place was not suitable for such a chant. He jokingly replied, "As if God would not hear my voice from here if some enemy had locked me in." The next morning, when he came back alone, they had both gone out for the same reason, he came to my bed and said, "Tell me truly, by everything you hope for, what you think of me now." I took his hand. "You know, you believe you understand what I think," I answered. "I do not think you sang so long and so often, 'God of hosts, turn us again, and show us your face, and we shall be saved,' for nothing." He remembered and was amazed. "You are saying something great and true," he said, "for I myself am struck by this. It was hard for me last night to be pulled away from those silly verses, and now I am ashamed and reluctant to return to them. I am being lifted up into great and wonderful things. Is this not truly to be turned to God? And I am also glad that the scruple of superstition that was put on me yesterday has turned out to be empty, about singing those words in that place." "That does not bother me either," I said. "I think it also belongs to the order of things that we could say something about this, for we can see that both that place where she was offended and the night itself fit that psalm very well. For from what do you think we are asking to be turned to God and to see his face, except from the mud and filth of the body, and from the darkness in which error wraps us? And what else is it to be turned, except to be lifted up from unrestrained vices by virtue and self-control? And what is the face of God except that very truth for which we sigh and to which we try to render ourselves clean and beautiful as to a beloved spouse?" "That could not be better said," he exclaimed. Then, more quietly, as if whispering in my ear, he added, "See how many things have happened to make me believe that something more favorable is now happening in us by order." "If you care about order," I said, "then you must go back to those verses. For the learning that comes from the liberal disciplines, if it is modest and restrained, makes the lovers of truth more lively, more enduring, and more well ordered, quicker to grasp, more constant in pursuit, and sweeter in their embrace of that reality which Licentius is called the happy life. Once that name is mentioned, everyone lifts themselves up and looks at you as if to see whether you have something to give them in their poverty and sickness. When wisdom begins to tell them to endure the physician and allow themselves to be treated with some patience, they fall back into their rags. They prefer to scratch their diseased skin with the heat from their filthy bandages than to endure the painful remedies that would restore them to health and light. So they live their miserable lives, content with the name of the highest God, as if that were a coin of alms. But there are other souls, if we can really call them men, who, while they are in the body, are already becoming ready for their wedding chamber, the best and most beautiful bridegroom. For them, it is not enough to live. They want to live happily. Go back then for the moment to those muses of yours, but do you know what I would like you to do?" "Tell me what you want," he said. "Command me." "When," I said, "you reach the point in your story where Pyramus kills himself and that girl, half dead, kills herself too, as the story is sung. Then, at the very height of their grief, where your poem ought to burn hottest, you will have the best opportunity. In that grief, you can launch into a curse against lust and those poison-filled fires that bring such miseries. Then lift yourself up completely into the praise of pure and clean love, love by which souls, adorned with learning and virtue, are joined by philosophy to the intellect, and not only escape death, but enjoy the happiest life. He silently nodded, thinking deeply, then left. Afterwards I got up too. After offering my usual daily prayers, we set off to the baths. In bad weather, when we could not be out in the fields, that place was very convenient and familiar for our discussions. As we reached the door, we saw roosters, barnyard cocks, starting a very fierce fight. We stopped to watch. Is there anywhere the eyes of a mind in love with rational beauty will not roam? Is there any place they will not search for signs that reason, which orders and guides all things through knowledge and ignorance alike, is at work? Reason invites those who hunger for it to follow wherever it commands. For where and when can it not give a sign? Even in those cocks you could see their heads thrust forward, their crests bristling, their fierce blows, their careful dodges. In the movements of animals that lack reason, there is nothing that is not somehow beautiful, because another kind of reason from above governs them all. There was also the law of the victor, his proud crowing, his body drawn together into a kind of circle of triumph and domination. And the sign of the defeated, his neck feathers drooping, his voice and movements all ugly, and yet even that ugliness was somehow fitting and beautiful under the laws of nature. We asked many questions. Why this is so in all of them, why they fight for dominance over the hens, why the spectacle itself draws us toward pleasure even when we are not thinking deeply about higher realities. We asked what it is in us that seeks much beyond our senses, and what it is that is taken captive by the invitation of the senses themselves. We said to ourselves, where is there no law? Where is government not owed to the better? Where is there no shadow of steadfastness? Where is there no imitation of that most true beauty? Where is there no measure? And being reminded by this that there should also be a measure in watching, we moved on to where we had planned to go. There, as well as we could, since the memory was fresh, and how could the work of 3 serious students be forgotten? We collected all the fruit of our night's labors into this little book. I did nothing else that day, in order to spare my health, except that before dinner I listened to them read half of a volume of Virgil, as I did every day. We noticed nothing so much everywhere as the measure of things. No one can fail to approve of this measure, but it is very difficult and very rare to feel it when one is passionately engaged in doing anything. The next day, early in the morning, we all came eagerly to our usual place and sat down there. I said, now, Licentius, be as present as you can, and you too, Trigetius, for this is no small matter. We are now inquiring about order. What am I to do? Shall I stand here as if I were back in that school I am so glad to have escaped, and start giving you some long, flashy praise of order? Let me give you instead a brief definition that, in my opinion, says the truth most clearly. Order is that which, if we hold to it in life, will lead us to God, and if we do not hold to it in life, we will not reach God. And I already presume and hope, unless my sense of you is deceived, that we are going to reach him. So this question must be turned carefully around among us and untied. I wish the others were here who usually join us for these discussions. I wish, if it were possible, that not only they but all our close friends, whose talent I always admire, were here with us now, as attentive as you are. Or at least I wish our Zenobius were here. I have never known him to be idle when dealing with such a great matter. But even though this is not the case, they will read our notes. We have decided not to waste words on such matters, but to tie them down with writing, as if with a chain, so that these passing things can be drawn back to memory. Then, if anything we say moves them to contradict us, this discussion will give birth to more discussions, and the very process of one conversation giving rise to another will fit itself into the order of our learning. For now, as I promised, I will take the side against Licentius as far as the subject allows. He has nearly finished his case for order. Now let him build a solid wall of defense around it. Seeing how silent, focused, and still they were, eyes fixed, limbs motionless, moved by the greatness of the matter and the desire to listen, I said, "So then, Licentius, gather all your strength and polish your sharpness as best you can. Give me a definition of what this order is." When he heard that he was being forced to define something, he shivered as if cold water had been poured on him. He looked at me, embarrassed, smiling nervously. "What is this you are doing?" he said. "What do you take me for? Do you really think I am filled by some spirit from outside?" Then, bracing himself, "Or perhaps," he said, "there is something with me." He was silent a little to collect into one definition everything he had in mind about order. Then, standing up straighter, he said, "Order is that by which all things are moved, which God has established." "What about God himself?" I asked. "Does he not seem to you to be moved by order?" "He does indeed," he said. "Then God is moved by order," Trigetius said. "And why not?" said Licentius. "Do you deny that Christ is God? He comes to us in an order and says he is sent by the Father. So if God sent Christ to us in an ordered way, and we do not deny that Christ is God, then God not only moves all things, but is himself moved by order." Trigetius hesitated. "I'm not sure how to take that," he said. "When we say God, we usually think of the Father, not of Christ. Christ comes to mind when we say the Son of God." "You are doing something strange," said Licentius. "Are we going to deny that the Son of God is God?" Since it was dangerous for Trigetius to speak against this, he forced himself and answered, "Christ is God too, but we usually call the Father God in the strict sense." "Hold your tongue," I said. "The Son is not called God in a loose way." Trigetius, moved by religious fear and not wanting his words written down, still pressed Licentius to keep them, like boys, or rather like nearly all humans, who treat glory as if it were the whole point of our conversation. When I rebuked this movement in him with sharp words, he blushed. Seeing his embarrassment, I noticed that Trigetius was laughing and rejoicing. "So this is what you are doing?" I said to both. "Are you not aware how many heavy weights of vice and darkness of ignorance still lie upon us? Is this the attention and rising of your minds toward God and truth, which I foolishly praised a little while ago? Oh, if you could only see, even with eyes as sore as mine, what dangers we are in, and what madness this laughter shows. Oh, if you could see it, how quickly would you turn that laughter into long weeping? Poor souls, do you not know where we are? It is true that the souls of all foolish and unlearned people are sunk deep, but wisdom stretches out her hand very differently to those whom she is calling upward, and those whom she allows to slide deeper down. Believe me, there are some whom she calls upward and others whom she lets go into deeper whirlpools. Please don't double my misery. My own wounds are enough for me. I beg God nearly every day with tears that they may be healed, but I often prove to myself that I do not deserve to be healed as quickly as I wish. So please, if you owe me any love or kinship, if you understand how dearly I love you and how deeply I care about your character, if I am worth your attention at all, if I am not lying before God when I say that I want nothing more for myself than I want for you, pay me back a kindness. If you gladly call me your teacher, then give me my reward. Be good." Tears cut my words short. Licentius was very upset that everything was being written down. "What have we done, really?" he asked. "Tell me." "You still don't admit your fault?" I said. "You know how angry I used to be at that school we just escaped, because the boys were led by a hunger for praise, not by a love of the beauty and usefulness of learning. Some would not even be ashamed to recite someone else's words, and then drink in applause, what a tragedy, from those whose words they were repeating. Even if you have never done this, as far as I know, yet you are trying to drag into philosophy, and into the kind of life I am so glad to have finally taken up, the final and worst plague of rivalry and empty boasting. And perhaps, because I am trying to turn you away from this disease, you will grow lazier in your studies, and when the love of windy fame is driven back, you may freeze into the cold of laziness. Poor me, if I must still deal with such people, those whose vices cannot leave them without other vices taking their place." "You will see," said Licentius, "how much more pure we will become. Only, We beg you, by everything you love, forgive us, and have all these things erased. Also, show mercy on our writing tablets, which we no longer have many of. None of what we have said has yet been copied into books. Let our punishment stand, said Trigetius, so that the fame which tempts us may by its own whip drive us away from loving it. For it will cost us much effort to make sure that these writings are known only to our closest friends and family. He agreed. At that moment my mother came in and asked what progress we had made, for she knew the question we were working on. When I ordered that her entrance and her question be written down, she said, "What are you doing? Have I ever heard of women being brought into such discussions in the books you read?" "I do not care much," I said, "about the judgments of proud and ignorant people who rush into books the way they rush into people's houses, thinking only about clothes and outward pomp, not about the kind of person within. Such people, when they read, do not really pay attention to where the question comes from, or where those who are arguing are trying to go, or what they explain and settle by their reasoning. Among them there are a few whose minds are not to be despised. They have been seasoned by some degree of culture and humanity, and like being led through golden painted doors into the holy inner rooms of philosophy. Our elders have done enough to satisfy these people, I think, and in our time to leave others aside, a great man in mind and speech, and in all the honors and offices of fortune, and above all in his soul, Theodorus, whom you know well, is working so that no class of people in the future can rightly complain that no one from our age wrote for them. As for my own books, if some day some person picks them up, reads my name, and does not throw the volume aside, saying, 'Who is this fellow?' but out of curiosity or great eagerness goes on reading despite my lack of worldly rank, they will certainly not be upset to find me talking philosophy with you. They may even look with some contempt on others whose style shows no real delight to the wise, even if that style wins the loudest applause of the ignorant and arrogant. For there are plenty of learned authors whose writings show even cobblers, and people of far lower station philosophizing. These souls, though born into such low fortunes, have shone with such brightness of mind and virtue that they would never agree, no matter what was offered, to trade their property for any rank of worldly nobility. Nor will there be lacking, believe me, that sort of reader who is more pleased by this very fact, that you are philosophizing with me, than by anything else they find here, whether sweet or serious. For even among the ancients, some women did philosophy, and your philosophy, mother, pleases me very much. Do not be unaware of this, mother. The Greek word philosophy means, in Latin, love of wisdom. The divine scriptures you love so much do not tell us to avoid philosophers altogether, but to avoid the philosophers of this world. There is another world far from these eyes, which only the minds of a few healthy souls can see. Christ himself makes this clear when he does not say, "My kingdom is not of the world," but "My kingdom is not of this world." So anyone who thinks we must flee from all philosophy wants nothing other than that we should not love wisdom. I would indeed despise you in my writings if you did not love wisdom. If you loved her only a little, I would not despise you. If you loved her as much as I do, still less. But since you love wisdom much more than you love me, and I know how much you love me, and since you have made such progress in wisdom that you no longer fear any misfortune of chance, nor even death itself, something even the most learned philosophers find very hard, and since everyone admits that this is the highest peak of philosophy, how could I not gladly become your student as well? She answered gently and devoutly that I had never exaggerated less. Seeing that we had spoken so many words that they needed to be written down, and that we had no more tablets, and that the size of the book was already enough, it pleased us to postpone the rest of the question. I also needed to spare my stomach, which had been stirred up more than I liked by what I had to pour out on those young men. As we were leaving, Licentius said, "Remember how many and what necessary things come to us from that most hidden and divine order, even when you yourself do not see it clearly." "I do see it," I said, "and I am thankful to God, and this helps me hope that you yourselves will become better, since you notice such things." That was my business for that day, and nothing more. Thank you for listening to this translation of Book 1 of Augustine's On Order, presented by Augustinus Vox. To experience this work, reimagined as a soaring 1980s rock exploration of harmony, providence, and the hidden patterns that guide the soul toward wisdom and love, please be sure to check out the corresponding Augustinus Vox album, On Order. Augustinus Vox is a restless heart project that reimagines Augustine's writings and the voices of antiquity through the power of 1980s rock, bringing ancient wisdom to modern ears through music, translations, and creative exploration. To learn more, please visit augustinusvox.com.